so I have 20 minutes until 9 o'clock, right? Okay. So thank you all for coming. It's amazing that so many of you showed up at this time. I'm I'm shocked, pleasantly surprised. So when I first read the conference topic, I kind of had a download, a kind of TV dinner version of the paper. It was something that I had done before, and it just came, and I was like, I sent the proposal, and then I was like, okay. And then I was feeling really bored with what I sent. I'm so sorry. And then kept on welling up something else over and over again. Something kept on welling up. And so I'm going to, if I'm allowed, do what we call in French a coup de théâtre. You have theater, and then you have the plot is going one way, and all of a sudden, boom, it goes the other way. If you will allow me, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to talk about something else, still related to the conference topic, obviously, but it's going to be a little different. You know how some pastors go up and they say, I had prepared a sermon, but the Lord, right? This is what is happening to me. So the Lord, or inspiration, or my muse, has prescribed something else for us this morning. So here's the title: In the Mother's House, the Lost and Forgotten Philosophical Texts of the Hebrew Bible. So it's a good way to start the day, to delve into the Bible. So it's good that I'm the first one. Okay, so too often I have noticed in my travels or in my experience as a professor of philosophy that the Bible and philosophy are seen as opposed, right? They're seen as conflictual, right? The Bible is the word of God. Philosophy is the word of humans. Why waste any time with the words of humans? Let's go straight to the word of God. Makes sense, right? The emphasis in our faith especially has been on verticality, right? God's revelation. Horizontality, maybe, and missionary work, but not in terms of learning or not in terms of listening to the voice of God, right? We have been focusing on verticality, on obedience to God's laws, especially our community is very much into, we have a lot of principles. We are standing on very high moral ground as a community, one of the highest in the Christian communities. So we have emphasized doing. We have emphasized laws. We have a strong connection to the Hebrew Bible, to the law part, right? The legal part of the Hebrew Bible. We observe these laws. And of course, separation from the world, right? As a community, we see ourselves as the remnant. We are in the world, but not of the world. And we need to make sure that we retain our purity, our integrity by not, merging too much with the surrounding nations. So this has been the context in which I grew up in which you grew up in. And this context I'm going to call the Father's house. And we will talk about this in a second. Within this context, as I was growing up in this context, becoming a teenager, becoming a woman in this context, I start to feel something is missing. Something in me is not being nourished here. I get it, the laws, the rules, I get it. It makes sense. I love them. The separation, yes, the obedience, verticality, but something in me is still empty. Something in me is still longing for more. And as I went back into the Hebrew Bible with this new desire, this new longing, I start to discover a whole set of different texts, a subculture, if you will, which I will entitle The Mother's House. And so today I want to introduce you to these underground texts, to these lost and forgotten texts of the Hebrew Bible, which have a totally different optic and which are actually the philosophical texts of the Hebrew Bible. These are the texts of wisdom literature, which are barely studied in our context, right? So what I'm seeing in the Hebrew Bible are two houses, right? Similar to in the Talmud, the two houses of study, the house of Hillel, the house of Shammai. These are two very famous rabbis who had schools of thought. And one was much more rigorous, one was much more loving. In the Hebrew Bible, there are also two houses, the father's house and the mother's house. Neither one should exclude the other. They were meant to work together. The voice of the father as well as the voice of the mother were meant to be heard together. I'm reminded of the book of Proverbs, where the father tells his son, listen to your father's teaching and do not forget your mother's teaching. In our community, we have listened to the father's teaching, but we do not even have an inkling, I believe, of the mother's teaching. My purpose today is to introduce you to the mother's house. Welcome. And be ready for something different. So, first of all, what are the texts that belong to the mother's house? These are the wisdom texts, the philosophical texts of the Hebrew Bible. Wisdom, if you're familiar with the Jewish breaking down of the Bible, you have the Pentateuch, you have the prophets, and then you have what they call the writings, the Ktuvim. This is the wisdom text. Book of Job, Book of Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Songs, Daniel, Book of Ruth, Book of Esther. All of these belong in the wisdom text. And all of these have a radical different worldview than what we have seen as the Father's house. All of these present the worldview, which I will present to you today, which is the worldview of the mother's house. Okay, so I have distinguished four main distinctions between the Father's house and the mother's house. And again, I'm not a feminist in the sense that I'm trying to overtake and break down and destroy the Father's house. That is not my role. I grew up in the Father's house. I have an amazing father who taught me everything I know with the Hebrew Bible, so I will never break down the Father's house. But I think we also need the mother's teaching. And so here is the first distinction you will notice between the Father's house and the mother's house in the Hebrew Bible. Father's house, God is masculine. The protagonists are masculine. The interpreters are masculine. This is where we have grown up as a community. We have seen God as masculine. The main characters that we have studied are masculine. The exegetes in history of interpretation are male, right? And so and this is fine. Mother's house, actually, you will see the divine feminine, the female voice, the female face of God. You will see more female protagonists, strong female characters, female leads, female wisdom. For example, I will give you one example of this, the most flagrant example of this female vision of God that we often don't talk about is found in Proverbs chapter 1. This is Lady Wisdom calling, right, for the fool or for whoever to come her way so they can gain wisdom. I'm reading from Proverbs 1. At one point, she sounds very much like God himself, actually. Here it is in chapter 1. I will call you, but I will not, you will call me, but I will not answer, she says. You will look for me, but you will not find me, right? She's saying, if you ignore me too long, there will come a time where you call on me, but I will not answer. You will look for me, but I will not be found. You have heard this before, a version of it in Isaiah 55. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is still listening, right? So we have an intention here in the book of Proverbs to show that this Lady Wisdom, this female character, is actually one of the faces of God, right? She represents in the Hebrew Bible the divine feminine, right? And so this is not new. In the ancient Near East, wisdom was actually personified by a woman, right? This is very common. In the Sumerian text, you have the goddess Inanna, who is also the goddess of wisdom. In Egypt, you have Ma'at, who is also the goddess of wisdom. Asherah was considered also in the Hebrew Bible, of course, was considered one of the goddesses. So in the ancient Near East, when you have a female character, it is usually, she is the embodiment of wisdom. So this is nothing new. Book of Proverbs is drawing on this tradition and giving us a very powerful feminine figure of God, feminine embodiment of God. By the way, later in the book of Proverbs, it mentions wisdom as the tree of life that we must embrace. Tree of life is a reference to Asherah, who was the tree, right? It distinguish her totem or her symbol was the tree. So Solomon is again borrowing and then flipping it, right? Of course, we have, of course, this divine feminine, but we have also, of course, the women in the Hebrew Bible who end up becoming the personification of wisdom. In the Hebrew Bible, there is the idea that because wisdom is feminine, woman embodies it best. And so you have a series of female characters who speak wisdom into the ears of the men around them, right? You have, of course, very famously, Job's wife. We never really notice Job's wife, but she really instigates the whole explosion of Job's emotions. We have Abigail, who speaks wisdom into David's ear. We have, in the Song of Songs, we have a woman. We have the book of Esther, book of Ruth, right? Strong female characters who embody wisdom. And in general, in the Hebrew Bible, the wife and the mother are specifically embodiments, personifications of wisdom. If you have a wife, you have wisdom living with you. Right? If you have a mother, you have wisdom living with you, right? So, and we need to understand this. In the Hebrew Bible, the woman is the embodiment of the divine feminine, of the wisdom, of Lady Wisdom. So that's the first thing we will notice. If we start to explore, you will see a multiplicity of feminine characters who fill the pages of the Hebrew Bible and who have words of wisdom to share with us. Second distinction, horizontal versus vertical. In the Hebrew Bible, the emphasis is on verticality. I mean, in the Father's house, rather, because the Hebrew Bible has both houses. Emphasis is on verticality. We receive the commandments, we follow God's voice, we listen to God. But then you have texts in the Hebrew Bible where the emphasis is horizontal, where you don't have God speaking, but rather humans in dialogue. And God, in a way, withdraws in the background, allowing humans to speak, allowing humans to engage. And so here we have the idea that the divine voice is also heard between humans, right? Revelation is not just vertical, it is also horizontal. It is not just heard between God and man, but it is heard between man and woman, between man and man, between father and child, between mother and child, right? This is where also God can be heard. Martin Buber, the philosopher, a Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, used to say, God is between us. God is not somewhere in the heavens. He's not in the heart. He's between human beings. He is in the I-thou interaction. As human beings interact in a way that is open to each other, God dwells in that in-between space, right? In the Talmud, you have an interesting story. You have the two houses, house of Shammai, house of Hillel, fighting, disagreeing. At one point, God intervenes and he says, both are the words of the living God, but the law will go according to the house of Hillel. And the rabbis are pondering, why? Why is he better, right? And then we notice that when the house of Hillel was engaging with the house of Shammai, they always let the people in the house of Shammai speak first. They were listening, they were open, right? And that is the way that God is saying, here I am in the listening, not so much in the speaking, right? So God is in between. And of course, we have these wisdom texts, these texts of the mother's house are full of dialogues. They're mostly dialogues. Song of Songs is a dialogue. Ecclesiastes is a dialogue between him and his soul. I have to be precise. Job is a dialogue. Book of Esther is a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue between Esther and Mordechai. Ruth is a dialogue where different characters are dialoguing. So here we have a radically different view of how to hear God's voice, right? God is heard here on the horizontal plane, not just on the vertical plane. Okay. You were right. I am running out of time. He warned me about this. Okay. Third, I'm at least halfway through. Third distinction. Wisdom versus law. This is the tricky one. This is where I will get lapidated, stoned. So here we have, in the Father's house, the emphasis is on law, right? God gives a law, we follow, we obey. Mother's house, emphasis is on wisdom. Now, what is wisdom? Wisdom is actually found not by listening to God's voice, but by living life, by entering life, by penetrating life, by stumbling around in life, by making mistakes, by falling, by failing, by transgressing, right? Wisdom very often is the fruit of transgression. It's very interesting that the mother's house has a very different perspective on sin and transgression than the father's house. Father's house is like, don't do it, ever, right? Mother's house is like, okay, you've gone there, now let's see what we can do, right? All of the books of Solomon are the results of transgression, right? Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. You have Song of Songs is one of the most transgressive texts in the Hebrew Bible when it comes to gender relations. They dig a little, you'll see what I'm talking about. So you have, right, the mother's house has a very different perspective. Why? Because in the mother's house, God is predominantly creating. In other words, and I tell this to my students, God loves our transgressions. Now, why is that? Because God sees a transgression and he's like, ooh, something interesting. They just made a big mess. Let me see what I can do with this mess. Ooh, this person is against the wall now in the ditch. Let me see what I can do with that. If you're an artist, any material is exciting to you, especially chaos. You see chaos, you're like, oh, by the way, you should know this, men and women, we know this. You know how women fall in love with men that are complete losers? Have you seen this? Why? Because they see chaos. And women are creative and they want to work with this chaos. And so you will see over and over again women falling in love with losers who are unformed, unfinished men, because we, the mother's house, love chaos. We love to work with it and make something out of it. That's God. God is that woman who falls in love with losers, right? And anytime we create chaos through our transgressions, God is excited. It's like, oh, something to do. Finally. Okay. I knew that would trigger some people. Okay. I'll be there for your questions. Okay. Fourth distinction, separation versus integration. In the Father's house, we separate from the world. We are different. We have integrity. We don't merge, blend, assimilate. In the Mother's house, we love the stranger. We love the nations. Come to us, enter us, come and visit with us, come and eat with us. You will notice in those wisdom texts of the Mother's house, a lot of influx from the nations. You might not know this, but the book of Ecclesiastes is half Egyptian, right? If any of you have studied this correctly, you know the powerful influence of Egyptian language and worldview and philosophy in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Proverbs, the last few Proverbs, the famous one on the woman, Proverbs 31, is a Canaanite author. Those people that were supposed to be exterminated are now part of the canon in the Mother's house. We welcome these sinners, right? For the Song of Songs, the woman whom we say, oh, she's just tanned from working in the fields, actually could be an African woman, right? Because we know that at the time, people, the society was mixed. There were people from all over the world, very much like today. And so she could have been very much a descendant or somebody coming from the regions of East Africa, right? And possibly, definitely, probably a very different race than the person she's dating in the Song of Songs, right? Ruth, the Moabite, never loses this thing called the Moabite. The Jews like to say Ruth converted, she's kosher, but she's not, is she? Because she's still called over and over again Ruth, the Moabite, even though she converted, right? So here you have this woman who preserves her ethnicity, her background, her otherness, her difference, and she is welcomed within that context. Thank you. Okay, so what we know from these texts is that what the wisdom texts are telling us, what the Mother's house is telling us, is that wisdom is acquired together. Law, that's God, but wisdom, you can't do it alone. You need to talk, you need to listen. I like to make this little test on my students. I'll do it to you. Maybe I did it last time. I do it to everyone. How many of you see this bottle? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see it? Actually, none of you see this bottle. You see this, you see that, you see this, and I see this. Together only we see the bottle. It's the same with truth. And the Mother's house is keenly aware of this. When it comes to wisdom and truth, we can only see it together. Jews and the nations, right? Jews and African, Jews and Canaanites, Jews and Egyptians. Together, we can see wisdom and we can understand the truth. Last difference. Ha, I'm almost done. Doing good. Okay. Receiving versus doing. And this is what I usually emphasize when I give talks on this particular topic. In the Father's house, we do. We have commandments to do. We have rituals to perform. It is a lot of doing for God. In the Mother's house, it is God who is doing. It is God who is fighting. It is God who is serving. In the Father's house, we serve God. In the Mother's house, we allow God to serve us. He sets a table before us in the presence of our enemies. I love that text, motto of my life. Right? God is setting the table. God is cooking for me right now as I'm talking to you, right? And this is one of the main differences. The Mother's house is receptive, it's passive, it's receptive, it's hearing wisdom. The Father's house is more of a doing, active, and performing the law. And you will see in many of the texts that are found in the wisdom books, the Song of Songs, Book of Ruth, Esther, Book of Job, if we study them in depth, you will notice that there is an emphasis here on losing the striving and opening up to receiving. And that's one of the main ideas of the Mother's house. So basically what you can see in conclusion, oh my God, I did so good. Conclusion, so proud of myself. In conclusion, when you see the features of the mother's house, what you're really seeing are the features of the seeker, right? This is someone who is open to what other people are saying, listening. Keyword in the book of Proverbs, Shema, listen, right? A person who is receiving versus doing, a person who is opening versus closing. The figure of the mother's house, the best embodiment of the mother's house is the seeker. And this is the very prerequisite of the person whom God wants to have next to him, right? A God is found not by the theologian or by the person who is doing everything right and keeping. God is found by those who seek. And in many ways, what we're seeing is that the mother's house is the prerequisite of the father's house. Can't have listening to God if you don't have listening to others. Can't have seeking God if you yourself are not marked by the attitude of seeking in everything else that you do. Father's house is impossible without the mother's house. The mother's house in many ways is the foundation of the father's house. And in many ways, you could say then that philosophy is the foundation of theology. Without philosophy, no true theology, no true revelation. I would love to end with Maimonides, and I will, since I have 1 minute, and it was anyways my paper topic, so I take this liberty. Maimonides, a medieval Jewish philosopher, used to say, without philosophy, religion is idolatry. Why? Right? If you don't have philosophical mindset, seeker mindset, mother's house mindset, you will fall into idolatry. Why? Because your mind will be too narrow to encounter God. You will see only a small version of God, which matches your small mind. And so the idea is to, mother's house, what it does, opens your mind in a crazy way, opens your mind, pushes you in the world. Go, explore, try this, listen to that, go out there. And as you go out there, your mind expands. Now you come back to the Bible. Wow, you see more than you've ever thought possible. Your mind is vast and capable of receiving the vastness of God. And so I want to end with Maimonides on this point, right? Without the mother's house, without philosophy, idolatry. This is what we are condemned to. And this is why it is so fundamental. If we are truly to read the word of God and hear the word of God, we have to develop our ears and we have to open our minds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. Now it's time for a Q&A session. So if anyone has a question that they'd like to ask Professor Doukhan. Yes.
I'm guessing the answer might be both to my question. Which house is Jesus in?
Actually, I'm making the case he's in the mother's house. Because if you, especially in the Gospels, of course, when you look at all the features I gave you, the preponderance of the feminine, the horizontal, the wisdom, the receiving, definitely you have in the Gospel of John, for example, is framed by women. The mother of Jesus begins the gospel, and Mary Magdalene and the gospel, right? And then you have elements of talking, right? He's dialoguing with the Pharisees, and in this dialogue, maybe something is happening. He's dialoguing with Jesus. Is all dialogue, right? Everything is a dialogue with him. That's how he teaches, right? The wisdom versus the law. Jesus's perspective on transgression is a very mother's housey, right? He understands, right? He's not punitive, right? Like he's not shocked at transgression like sometimes we are. So you could say, right, elements here of the mother's house. And of course, Jesus is all about grace, right? Receive God. You cannot do this. You have to receive the breath of life. You have to receive. So I would argue, of course, you can make the same case for Father's house. Perhaps we can say Jesus is the perfect blend of the masculine and the feminine because he is God, right? And God is, of course, the perfect blend of the masculine and the feminine, right? We were made in the image of God, male and female. He created them. So in a way, Jesus, we've seen him as male and seen him through a male perspective, but you can see just as much with the female lens. I would say he is a hybrid of both. Yes, Father's house and mother's house.
To add to that, Paul himself refers in Corinthians to Jesus as Sophia,
Nice, thank you.
The Greek name for Hokmah in Proverbs.
Thank
So,
you for that.
Yeah, there's a direct
That's
text
great,
of that
that's great.
in the back there, yes.
Thank you, Miguel.
Hi.
Always illuminating and refreshing.
Mhm.
I also agree with you in the sense that the philosophy understood as wisdom is the base of a larger view and integrates view. And theology without that leads to be idolatrous. But you mentioned Maimonides, and I would ask, it depends on which kind of philosophy, because all the Hebrew Kabbalah, Isaac Luria, for instance, criticize Maimonides because he has identified too much a relation with Aristotelian philosophy. And this is a big reaction. Isaac Luria says Maimonides did well, but with the wrong philosophy. The Kabbalah wanted to correct that.
Thanks. Kabbalah can talk. It was hugely influenced by Neoplatonism. We say, l'hôpital qui se moque de la charité, the hospital which makes fun of the clinic. is very much influenced by Greek thought, also the Kabbalah. But what Maimonides is doing, yes, he's influenced by Aristotle, but I don't think this is one of the places where he's influenced by Aristotle, right? Because he's doing something very Jewish. When you look at the Talmudic epistemology, when the Talmudic rabbis are talking, they're constantly talking and never concluding, right? There's an awareness that the truth is revealed in contact with the other. This is an essentially Jewish idea, that truth is revealed in the dialogue. And so when Maimonides now is broadening the dialogue to include that, he's doing something very Jewish, right? And so in that particular moment, I would say he's most profoundly Jewish and not so much Aristotelian. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes. How would you say the idea of the mother's house would impact, relate to, affect our understanding of salvation?
So for me, Mother's House was such a relief, right? Because I'm one of those Solomonic people who see there's two types of people, those who follow and those who can't. And I'm one of those who can't, right? So obviously I'm going in all kinds of tortured paths, right? For me to see the Mother's House and the attitude towards transgression, seeing transgression as a possible path to God, was an extreme relief. So in terms of salvation, the Mother's House already perspective on transgression as a possible path to God, and of course the notion of receiving, where in essentially salvation is a grace, is something that comes to me, right? That kind of pursues me, like Jonah. God is pursuing Jonah, or that snatches me. Right, I'm not over here doing everything right. I'm over here doing everything wrong, right? And I get snatched back. Right, that's what I love about. The biblical authors knew not everyone's going to be a follower. Not everyone's going to be surrendering, and we have to have something for those guys who can't follow. And so they created this Bible, this gospel of the black sheep, which in my view are the texts of the Mother's House. They hit directly somebody who just is on that path, right? Does that answer?
Yeah, so thank you.
Abby, thank you very much for these insights. I am wondering from a philosophical point of view, do you think that what you have given us comes primarily from your unpacking of the ancient text, just being true to what you find in terms of the words and the ideas of the time, and how much it comes from you as a contemporary student who is looking at that, and even more importantly, you as a contemporary person in the culture of 2023, and does it make a difference?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving philosophical relevance to my little homily here that I gave you. It's exactly that, right? Anything that I found in this, it has come from me looking at the text with my thirst, not finding in our tradition nourishment for my feminine soul. I have not been finding it. And I became aware of my feminine soul through my contact with philosophical writers who are womanist or feminist. I start to see, oh, this is who I am. Oh, interesting. And then I go back in the text and I look, is there anything for me? And I find, right? Because the text is so rich. So absolutely. This is why yeah, so definitely not so much my philosophical training as my existential thirst has brought me back to this, right? Because I don't do feminism, or I do womanist, but not feminism. So I'm not over here deconstructing the text and showing, it's patriarchal, I'm not doing that. I'm thirsting. I'm shaped my soul, it's shaped in a certain way as a feminine soul. And I was thirsty in our community. I was not receiving nourishment. And so I came back to the text looking, where are the women? And then I start to find this well, right, of the mother's house. So not so much I don't feel like my philosophical background pushed me into this direction. It was more like my own thirst, right? Maybe you disagree.
Well, but I would think that your philosophy of life and of religion allows you to be able to do what you're doing, right? I mean, you don't get that out of the male-dominated text.
I got it. See, you're looking at philosophy as a system. Philosophy for me is a question. So when I'm thirsting and when I'm questioning, I am doing philosophy. I'm not quoting this guy, that guy, that guy. That's not philosophy, right? Philosophy is me. I am thirsty, I am asking, I am questioning. So in as much as I was thirsting and questioning, I was doing already pure philosophy in my attitude, right? And perhaps that questioning was strengthened by my background in philosophy, or was, I was made more confident in my questioning, but the questioning itself is inherently coming from me, and it is inherently philosophical. So I don't see philosophy as out here. Philosophy is coming, really. I am really naturally doing it, and so are we all when we question, right? Yes.
Thanks for that last piece, especially if philosophy is a question against theology and answer, and if so, those of us who are inclined to want to become the mother's household, and those of us inclined to be comfortable in the father's household, is there ever a coming together?
Yeah. So first of all, to your first question, right? Karl Jaspers, 20th century German philosopher, distinguished exactly like you, philosophy questions, theology answers, but he wasn't too happy. He was saying, it is good that philosophy questions and goes on questioning, and these answers really should be, right, we should be careful with these answers because it falls now in the category of idolatry. An answer is a rigid concept that is final. It should be hypotheses, working formulas, right? As soon as you have an answer, you have something rigid and fixed, which cannot be moved, and that is the essence of the idol. So Jaspers would encourage theology to be answering, but always leaving room for more questions, right? It should be dynamic, like God. God is dynamic, right? And the second question, sorry, remind me.
Coming together.
Oh yeah, no, I think we should hang out in both. Like I hang out in the father's house. Listen, when you're in a classroom, right? I'm pure father's house. Rules, come on time, don't be late, points off, punishments, right? I'm ruthless in the classroom, but I need that framework so I can then give the mother's house teaching, right? So you need both, like just like a child needs both, right? Both approaches, we'll say, right? It's important. So I definitely have strong father's house moments, but the father's house then becomes a framework for me to be able to go deeper, right? So I think no, we should party in both. Yeah, we should. Definitely. Yeah, no, there should not be. Of course, I'm more comfortable, right? But we should definitely visit each other. Yeah, eat with each other.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really wonderful, and it's really helps us to kind of like see salvation in a new way. Because the Hebrew Bible is filled with the God's mother attributes, and Isaiah 49, 14 onward talks about this, line says that God has forsaken me, my Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman get her sucking child, and she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? yeah, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee.
Yeah.
So basically, and you kind of like brought it out in the last question, in that you know, it helps me to see like a child was being nursed and brought up by the mother, but now she hands the child over to the father,
Right.
and it's sort of kind of like out of the mother's house, but this grown child is being disciplined by the father, and the child is really yearning and longing for the mother's house in the father's house.
Yes. Excellent. I love it.
So-
Yes.
So you kind of like brought it together and saying we need both, and sort of like how in salvation, when we're experience justification and we're in sanctification, we still need justification
Yeah.
in that process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I chose the middle way here, and it's, will be both father's house, both mother's house. I'm never going to get any problems from you when I say that. Yes, thanks.
That, which is,
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're holding.
I don't want to jump in.
No, you're good.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering, I'd love to get your thoughts on how you think these mothers' house views God in the Bible. And I ask that because it seems like in some comments you've made, you feel like there's this essence that women have and men have. And
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
not saying
Everyone
you're
criticizes me on this.
yeah, but so I would just love to get your thoughts on that. Like if, like who are the people that were writing and redacting the Bible, and then with, how did they come to
Yes.
have these
that's
insights?
That's
So,
good, yeah. So yeah, I've been accused of essentialism.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying, but yeah.
And I know, but so first of all, we need to remember that one of the first believers is coming from a deeply matriarchal society. Abraham is coming from Sumeria, which is predominantly matriarchal at the time when Abraham is living. Later, it becomes patriarchal, right? And then you have the Babylonians and things. But there was always in Mesopotamia, in the ancient Near East, was predominantly originally a matriarchal culture, and you have influences of these cultures in the book of Genesis very powerfully. You have this in the story of Eve at the tree eating the fruit, the strong, powerful role she's given in that story. There are echoes in Sumerian literature in the text connected to the goddess Inanna. So you have strong influence of the matriarchal ancient Near Eastern culture, especially in the book of Genesis. Of course, then you see the matriarchs, the power that they have, right, to shift history. And then, of course, with Moses, things become a little more patriarchal, right? But still, after all, he is known to have written the book of Job, which is also has strong matriarchal flavor, right? And Egypt was a very matriarchal society. So the culture, before it became patriarchal, was very, very matriarchal and has definitely flowed into the Hebrew Bible. That's where you can see these texts and these allusions to goddess practices and so